Welcome everyone to another fun episode of Indie Reads Aloud. Today, Marianne Wieland is going to be sharing her romantic comedy, My Heart for Jill. Thank you for being here with us, Marianne. I'm really excited about listening to your story.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. This is going to be fun, I think.
It is going to be fun. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about you because maybe they don't know as much about you as I do. Marianne Wieland has been writing for most of her life, and it allows her to escape into many different situations and places. She can be anything, do anything, and try anything in writing that in real life she might never try. She has found that her experiences in nursing and teaching creep into her writing more often than not. Marianne started writing novels a few years ago, and she has continued with it because of her love for the characters she has created. She plans to continue on this path, supported along the way by readers and those in the indie writing community. And for those of you who don't know, fun fact about Marianne, she has also written plays and musicals performed on the stage. I'm so glad you're here. We are great friends, and I'm so excited to share your work with everybody.
I'm really happy to be here, and I appreciate all you've done to help me and give me tips to help me in my endeavor to write. I
That's what
appreciate
I
that.
do. That's what I love. The more people I can get to read stories out loud to me, the better.
Mhm.
So today, Marianne is going to read My Heart for Jill, which is a romantic comedy. To Jill Dennison, her successful restaurant and weekly cooking show were second only to her family. Having had her heart broken and her self-esteem trashed, she was certainly not looking for love when Nick Wallace came into her life. However, a case of mistaken identity later, Nick was slated to compete in a live cooking competition on Jill's show against her. In this romantic comedy, many surprises await, love abounds, and people seek to form ties that bind in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of West Virginia. This just sounds like such a fun book. Can you tell me what was your favorite part about writing this book?
Probably the first part where the mistaken identity happens and Nick gets shoved in front of the camera and mistaken for a famous French chef that he actually knows personally.
Oh,
And
fun.
so so that's kind of a fun part of it. And there's a lot of fun parts like that throughout the book. But there's also a strong mystery in the book, and I always forget to point that out. And that's a fun part too.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing it. This is one of your books I have not had a chance to read yet, so I'm going to be listening along just like everybody else. So when you're ready,
Okay.
please take the microphone and read aloud.
All righty. Here we go. Where in tarnation is that man? Lorraine Dennison said as she paced faster and faster across the studio kitchen floor. The tap, tap, tapping of her mother's high heels were starting to wear on Jill's nerves. Her mother tended to be overly high strung when the filming was due to begin of Jill's weekly show, Cooking Up a Storm. Most of the family tended to be on the laid back side, including Jill, but not Lorraine, especially when everything was not going according to her lists and schedules. However, this was the first show of the second season, and the guest chef had yet to appear. Mama, calm down, Jill said in her mild West Virginia accent. We are West by God Virginians, as Nana would say, and everything will turn out fine. I can't afford to calm down, said Lorraine. When I spoke with Chef Laurent's agent on the phone, the agreement was that he would be here with plenty of time to be briefed on how the competition works. And Jillian Marie Dennison, don't you dare preach to me. I get enough of that from my mother. Why did you hire him without a face-to-face meeting anyway? That is so unlike you, said Jill. Lorraine stopped pacing and began to check her appearance in the closest mirror. She fussed a little with her perfectly coiffed bleach blonde hair and checked her teeth for lipstick smudges before she answered. Well, I know that is out of character for me, but his reputation precedes him. He is the best French chef in New York City. Once he agreed, I set everything up with his agent. Besides, your father has met him and reckons he'd be a great guest chef for the start of our new season. Jill's grandmother, Nana, came into the studio. Land's sake, Lorraine, quit a getting your two fancy britches all tied up in knots. He'll come in here a marching his highfalutin tookus in front of everybody just to show us hillbillies he's better'n we are. You mark my words. With that, Lena Josephine Marshall, or Nana, as the family called her, sauntered out of the room leaning on her cane. Hey, y'all, Jill's younger sister, Josie, came into the room leading a young girl by the arm. The girl couldn't be more than 15 or 16 by the look of her, thought Jill. Her dark blonde ponytail was sitting high on top of her head, and stylish teenage clothing almost screamed she was from the city, and Jill would bet not from a West Virginia city. Dad's running late, so I'm going to start his 4 o'clock interview. This is Annika, by the way, and she's applying for that open position with the kitchen cleanup crew. I'm just going to chat a little until Dad gets here, make her feel comfortable. Ain't that right, honey? We'll be in the lounge if you need anything. Before she left the room, she said to her mother and sister, by the way, Alphonse Laurent is drop dead gorgeous. Just wait until you see him. With that, she left the studio, dragging Annika behind her. Nick Wallace was taking a leisurely stroll from Allen's Market, where he'd picked up a few things for his and his daughter's new home. Most of the food and non-food items were for her, and his plan was to meet her at, turn the page, sorry, at a restaurant called Mountain Mama's, where she had a 4 o'clock interview for, he guessed, some sort of odd job. He was not convinced she had a good skill set to hold down a job unless the job in question was expensive clothing, chasing boys, or texting on the phone. Anyway, the place sounded like a dump to him, but he was impressed she had wanted to earn some money for herself. Up until now, she had shown no interest in moving to this place and had been punishing Nick for making her spend the last 2 years of high school in this podunk town, as she called it. The last 4 years, she had been living with his parents in the penthouse of the Grand Wallace, New York, the hotel chain owned by his family. Since Nick was traveling most of the time scouting new locations for building, he had seen no other choice but to leave his precious daughter in the hands of his parents, Margaret and Andrew Wallace. Of course, he knew Annika would be managed mostly by a nanny and a butler to make sure she had the necessities such as getting to school on time, healthy meals, and did her homework. The less she was in his mother's company, the better. Prior to 4 years ago, Annika had been raised by Nick's Aunt Bess in a small town about an hour from New York City. Aunt Bess had been a lifeline for Nick during most of his formative years of his youth, and he had spent most of his life from the age of 8 into his adulthood in her loving presence. Aunt Bess was his mother's sister. She had lost her husband only after a few years of marriage, and they were never blessed with children. Two people could not have been more different than his mother and his aunt. Where his mother was arrogant, narcissistic, and intolerant of anyone who she felt did not measure up to her standards, his Aunt Bess had been a loving, hardworking, and nurturing Christian woman. Aunt Bess had taken over the raising of Nick at her sister's request. His older brother had been sent away to boarding school in London, and his younger sister and brother were no trouble to the nanny. It was just Nick who posed a problem. He refused to stay in the background of his parents' lives, and boarding school had been unsuccessful. Nick was gifted in playing the piano, and his mother had asked her sister to raise Nick and try to facilitate this gift. Nick was not sure how his mother knew about his gift, since she never bothered to come to a single recital or even listen to him play at home. And when she did happen to overhear him practicing, it was to criticize. Aunt Bess was all too happy to do this, and Nick was all too happy to go. However, 4 years ago, Aunt Bess had stopped at a teller machine to withdraw some cash before going home. Annika had a field trip the following day, and she wanted to make sure Annika had enough money for the gift shop. Aunt Bess was robbed at gunpoint by a drug-crazed teenager who had no idea how to use a gun. He accidentally shot himself in the foot before accidentally shooting Aunt Bess in the abdomen. She died before the ambulance came, and not a day had passed since that time that Nick didn't miss her and wish he could turn back time. A car horn blared and Nick came back to the real world. He was across the street from a place that had Mountain Mama's restaurant and studio emblazoned across the home-style entrance. It was a very large two-story house-like structure made from rough-hewn wood, logs, and decorative stones. The place was impressive, so okay, it was not a dump. Nick decided to wait inside with his bag of groceries and hope his presence did not embarrass his daughter. It had begun to do so ever since she had been living with his parents. He entered the front door and noticed some benches to his right, so he sat down with his grocery bag and began to check his cell phone for messages or texts. Annika had said she would let him know when she was finished. "There you are!" He saw the short, big-haired blonde woman rushing toward him. He looked over his shoulder in case he was not the intended target. "Get off your duff and quickly follow me. We're on the air in 6 minutes." She started walking away, then noticed his grocery bag. "I hope you haven't been looking through that bag. It's against the rules, you know." She grabbed his arm and started pulling him off the bench. "I have been crazy with worry. Do you know how frantic everyone has been waiting for you?" She was moving at a slow jog and waving her arms around as she continued to reprimand him. So the crazy part he could believe. Nick kept up with her as best as he could and tried to speak. "Miss, I think you've got..." Jill saw them coming and thought drop-dead gorgeous was an understatement. She yelled loud enough for him to hear her. "Get over here now so I can brief you." Nick tried again. "Now, wait a minute." The short blonde woman all but pushed him behind what appeared to be a kitchen setting surrounded by cameramen and other equipment and crew. Someone put a white apron on him from behind and a chef's hat on his head. His grocery bag was set to his left side. Some older lady with a tight gray perm and leaning on a cane came to stand in front of him. She lowered her glasses to look up at him. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Fancy Pants, what in the Sam Hill made you think you could trot in here this late? Famous French chef or not, I declare." And she wandered off. Nick looked to his right and his mouth dropped open. He could not have gotten words out if he tried. He supposed this woman must be Mountain Mama. She was taller than average, maybe 5'9" or so, with big bones or muscles, he couldn't tell. She was wearing what looked like a tablecloth with arms, the red and white checkered kind. White? He couldn't tell, either since it looked 50 years old or was in need of a good washing. For that matter, the whole woman was in need of a good washing. Her grayish-brown hair was sticking out of her head like it had been tased, and she was missing 2 or 3 teeth in the front. What on earth had he been pushed into, he thought. Maybe even said out loud. Who could tell with all the noise and activity going on around him? The short blonde lady appeared on the other side, giving him some kind of instructions. "Now, it goes like this. Mountain Mama will introduce you, and when the clock starts, you will have 1 minute to make a game plan and 45 minutes to cook a supper with all the ingredients in your grocery bag that has been provided by our crew. Your agent informed me that you understood the rules and were prepared for the battle." With that, she moved to the other side of the kitchen area. Someone else appeared from behind and patted his face down with powder. He was going on live television. Live! It dawned on him all of a sudden. This was a cooking show, and they were expecting some famous French chef to compete with this hillbilly nightmare. He had to get out of there. He had to get out of there quick before... Too late. The cameraman was counting down, and country music started playing. The old lady to his right started doing a sort of hillbilly hip-hop dance. She put on a wide, toothless smile and started loudly talking to the camera. "Welcome to Cooking Up a Storm with me, Mountain Mama." Nick heard loud shouting and clapping, but due to the bright lights and activity, had not noticed the small studio audience. Mountain Mama continued. "What a treat we have for y'all today. We're starting our 2nd season with guest chef Alphonse Laurent from Marcel's of New York City." He heard louder shouts and clapping. Then he heard a loud, funny buzzing in his ears. "No, no, no, this cannot be happening. Of all the chefs in the world, not Alphonse Laurent. Marcel's was the signature restaurant in the Grand Wallace, New York. All he could think of was kill me now." Jill continued her dance and looked to Alphonse, who appeared about ready to faint. Strange. She had heard of his reputation for being the best in French cuisine, but also his love for the camera. Oh, and his foul temper. Drop dead gorgeous. Didn't even begin to describe this man. It's so good to have y'all here, Alphonse, to start the new season off with a darn tootin' good French supper, she continued. So you think you can beat old Mountain Mama with all that fancy French food in your grocery bag, do you? French and supper? Was it legal to use both words in the same sentence, thought Nick? Mountain Mama was looking at him. He was starting to sweat, big time. He realized she was expecting him to say or do something. How about it, Alphonse? Are you ready to beat the britches off this old lady? Jill noticed he was white as a sheet and holding himself up by the kitchen counter. Something was terribly wrong. Maybe he was sick. She moved over close to him, pretending to adjust his chef's hat, and said so only he could hear it. Dude, say something. We've got to get this show going. What? He whispered back to her while wiping sweat from his forehead. Anything. The sooner we get started, the sooner we'll finish, said Jill. Funny, thought Nick, the old lady had a whole different voice tone speaking personally to him. Nick gave a slight nod and swallowed hard to beat down the sudden nausea. In for a penny, in for a pound, as his Aunt Bess would say. So he did the only thing he could do in this situation. He swallowed again and jumped in with both feet. In what he hoped was a French accent, he said, It is my pleasure to help with your ill-billy ruse. Jill whipped her head towards him and narrowed her eyes. That was the fakest French accent she'd ever heard. Actually, it sounded more like a combination of French and Turkish? Maybe a little bit of New York. Well, 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 I believe we got us a good one here today, folks. I think Alphonse must be from the Bronx of France. At least I am not from the dog patch or pumpkin patch or some kind of patch, to be sure, Nick countered. Lorraine appeared on camera and took control. Mountain Mama and Alphonse will now unpack their grocery bags and will have 1 minute to make a game plan. They may also use any of the ingredients provided in our studio pantry and fridge behind them. You may start unpacking now. With that, Lorraine stepped out of the camera range. Jill began to unpack her bag. Her little brother, Matt, usually stocked the grocery bags and always tried to stump her with the unusual ingredients. Today, she unpacked mangoes, eggplant, pork loin, red cabbage, potato sticks, raisins, rhubarb, cottage cheese, and cream corn. Okay, she could work with that, and she began to organize and add to her grocery bag ingredients from the pantry. Nick, on the other hand, knew what was in his bag since he had just picked the items up earlier, most of them being for his daughter. He was very reluctant to unpack it. Either way, he would be jeopardizing this show more than he already had if he didn't do something to move forward. So reluctantly, he unpacked boxed macaroni and cheese, peanut butter, strawberry jelly, peach-flavored Greek yogurt, Oreos, frozen pizza rolls, pretzels, a hammer, shampoo, pantyhose, and birdseed. Jill was speechless, but only for about 5 seconds. Well, that there is some kind of foreign French food, folks. You've seen it here first. Just think, you lucky judges will get to sample this fine French delight. Boy, just wait until she found Matt. He had gone too far this time. She heard someone from the audience stand up and yell, I think you might be a wanting to jerk a knot in somebody's rump for what you got in your bag there, Alphonse, you fine, good-looking a piece of French finery. Of course, that came from Nana and was loud enough for everybody to hear. Nick felt the red creeping up his face, and he had no idea what to cook with the items he had to work with. Aunt Bess would say, your best defense is to go on the offense if you're backed into a corner. So, what are you making? Stuffed possum supreme? Wait, he looked around wildly. I don't see the possum. Here you go. You can use the hammer to catch that one I saw out on the back porch. He picked up the hammer just in case she took him up on the offer. For all he knew, would surprise him if there was a possum out on the back porch. Lorraine was fanning herself from a chair, and Nana called out, standing once again, Now I'd like to see that. The audience started laughing. What are you planning to cook with your birdseed and your pantyhose? Suet? Jill had both hands on her hips. Both were starting to stare at each other when Jill's father, Jim Dennison, a totally white-haired man, even though he was only in his early 50s, walked up with Josie and a young girl. "What did I miss? It's awful loud out here." He looked up at Nick. "Who's that?" Just then Annika stepped forward. "Dad?" What had he told himself earlier? Oh, yeah, he wanted to keep from embarrassing his daughter. Well, that ship had sailed. Mountain Mama spoke loudly. "Time's a wasting," she looked at Nick. "Let's start cooking up a storm." The music started back up, and Mountain Mama started that hillbilly tap dance thing again, and he noticed she was writing something on a piece of paper. "Live show, can't break, cook something now." He looked at his daughter, who was sitting at the table with her head down on her crossed arms. The old lady was sitting next to her, patting her on the back. He looked over at Mountain Mama and started bobbing his head up and down like he was trying to dance with her. "I'm not Alphonse," he whispered. Jill stopped dancing and shouted with her hands in the air, "Shocker!" She realized a second too late that everyone else had heard her obnoxious statement as well. She did the only thing she could think of to fix it. "Look at you, you good-looking French son of a gun, over here a-trying to flirt with me." Nick's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets, and he backed into the counter, knocking half his supplies to the floor. Jill continued at his expense. "Wouldn't be the first time I've had to fend off the fellers after this pretty face." She gave him a big wink and started hamming it up for the camera. Nick could feel his face was on fire as he began to pick up his groceries. He braved another look at his daughter and saw that she was starting to laugh along with the rest of the audience. She seemed to be enjoying his mortification. No surprise there. Lorraine had rallied and was approaching them at their kitchen stations. Nick figured he could not possibly have looked any more ridiculous than he did at that moment, so he made the decision to jump in with the hilarity and spirit of the show. After all, what did he have to lose? Well, for one, his dignity. Oh, and a possible lawsuit from Alphonse Laurent. He could cook macaroni and cheese and make pizza rolls, so he started a pot to boil the water and turned on the oven. He saw Lorraine stop at Mountain Mama's station. "What will you be cooking up for us today, Mountain Mama?" asked Lorraine. "Well, Lorraine, thank you for asking. I'm a going to cook up some pork chops with a rhubarb sauce, some fancy slaw, and a side dish of eggplant and taters using the tater sticks. I'm also going to bake up some of my special cornbread with the creamed corn. It's going to be a dandy." Lorraine made a point of looking at each thing Mountain Mama pointed out. "That sounds so yummy, Mountain Mama. I'm sure our judges' mouths are just watering, waiting for a taste. Now, I'm starting by taking my fancy kitchen hatchet," she waved it in the air, "and chopping up this hunk." She looked straight at Nick and landed a loud chop through the pork loin, "of meat." "I see," said Lorraine, looking from Jill to Nick. "That's going to be a real Mountain Mama treat for our judges." Lorraine moved hesitantly over to Nick's area as he was adding the macaroni to the boiling water and putting the pizza rolls in the oven. "Now, Alphonse, what kind of fancy French treats will you be presenting to our judges today? And remember, you have to use everything in your grocery bag." He glanced again out at his daughter and saw her eyes were narrowed and she had a nasty smirk on her face. She too knew most of what was in the bag since she had put the items on the grocery list. She was loving his misery. Well, two could play that game. "Lorraine, my turtle dove, I am making the pasta surprise of my country, so loved by the children all over the France." He muttered under his breath, "It'll be a surprise if it's edible. I will then make a dipping sauce from the jelly and some cayenne pepper to give it the kick. I will also be making the dessert that is, how you say, to die for." "Okay, then, how interesting that sounds. Alphonse, what will you be doing with the non-edible items in your grocery bag?" "Lorraine, I am glad you asked that question." Nick grabbed her hand, made a low bow, and kissed it with a loud smack. "Gracias for asking." The audience howled with laughter. "What did I say?" Nick continued. "As I was saying before, I will wash my hands now with this shampoo." "But Alphonse," Lorraine interrupted, You have already started to work with the food. Shouldn't you wash your hands before you start? We, stated Nick. But in my country, we start the cooking process and then we wash with the shampoo. He looked at the name of the bottle. Shampoo du Joie. We find that saves time that way. Lorraine looked at the camera, speechless. Nick continued. With the hammer, I will crush the cookies and the pretzels for the dessert. He began to pound with the hammer, making a huge mess all over the counter. Mountain Mama came back with, will you be adding in the bird seed too? 9, 9, 9, Nick wildly gestured with his arms, scattering cookies and pretzels and seed all over the sink and floor. The bird seed I will put in the pantyhose like this. He poured the birdseed down one leg of the pantyhose and cut the leg off with the kitchen shears. He tied the hose in a knot to form a medium-sized ball of seed. This will make cleanup so easy you will want to use all the time. He demonstrated by squirting some shampoo over the counter, soaking the birdseed and pantyhose combination. He began to wipe down the counter, making a slimy, soapy mess. It is magnifico. Nick took a dramatic bow and waved to the audience. He got a thunderous applause and a standing ovation for his effort. He looked at Mountain Mama, who was shaking her head at him, but he thought he saw her trying hard not to laugh. He also heard her whisper, dude, get your plates together, quick. Lorraine rallied again and called the 3 audience judges to the front. Nick saw a table set with silverware and water glasses for 3 people. If he was a praying man, no, he was never going down that road again. No one was listening anyway, at least not to him. Nick hurriedly slopped some of the way too chewy macaroni and cheese on 3 plates, making a hole in the middle. He filled the hole with a big glob of peanut butter. His pizza rolls were burned, but he thought still edible. He watered down the strawberry jelly with pancake syrup and added the cayenne pepper for the dipping sauce. He scraped the hammered cookies and pretzels into the peach yogurt and added some to all 3 plates. Lorraine gave a 1-minute warning, and Nick looked over at Mountain Mama to see her plates were already done. She had her hands on her ample-looking hips and was looking at him with a look that could only be described as, well, there were no words to describe how she was looking at him. At the last minute, he decided to put a few drops of jelly around the macaroni wreath and finished just as Lorraine called the end of the competition. Time, step away from your plates. Nick stepped back from the food, but as he did, he grabbed a handful of the birdseed, throwing it over his shoulder. For good luck. Jill put on her Mountain Mama toothless smile and grabbed a handful of birdseed as well. She hammed it up for the audience, throwing it over her shoulder as Nick had done. For good luck. She looked over at Nick and said quietly so only he could hear, you're going to need it. And there we have it. That's the end of this reading.
That was a lot of fun. That was a little bit of Bobby Flay meets Groucho Marx. That was
yeah.
It
was fun to write.
Fun. Yeah, I guess that was terrific fun. I'm looking forward to seeing how this competition ends up and how they discover Nick is not who they think Nick is. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm so glad you came to read for us today, Marianne.
Well, it was fun.
Everybody should check out the show notes. You can find Marianne's website there. And Marianne also writes Military Intrigue, and she's going to be back on another day to read from that for us. So thank you so much, Marianne. I hope you have an awesome afternoon.
I thank you very much, and I appreciate it again for you having me. Thank you, Diana.
It was fun. It was a good giggle.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.